Hello and welcome back to my second video on suggestions for a HOI4 expansion. If you didn't see the first video, don't worry, as this video focuses solely on one overarching concept instead of lots of small features. This is to me the most overlooked feature that, with a couple of modifications, I think could really change the opening experience for the better. Before I begin, I'll just say if you enjoy these kind of videos, the best support you can give me to make more is to like the video and subscribe. So if you do, thank you. So the crux of this video revolves around one major idea, one that primarily focuses on the historical nature of World War II. That's right, making the game more historical, not very common for this channel. That being appeasement. Appeasement is a concept that dominated the interwar period, fueled by the fear of another great war and the economic and socio burdens that come with it. My suggestions come in that the game could explore more ways that appeasement could be implemented and the importance it served to the 3.5 years, that being from January 1936 all the way up to mid-1939 with the declaration of war against Poland. So, how can we create a better appeasement in HOI4? I've come up with 3 mechanics that could potentially serve to this end, these being treaties, the League of Nations, and the very notion of peace. So, without further ado, let's begin with the first one, treaties. So after World War I, the Paris Peace Conferences created a vast amount of treaties to basically stop another war from happening. They gave way too many affirmations towards France and the United Kingdom. They gave them money and land and territories abroad, colonies, all of it. And essentially they focused on Germany, Austria-Hungary and Turkey, which at the time was of course the Ottoman Empire. The thing is the treaties that were made after that seem to don't have any presence in the game whatsoever, despite how many there were. Now, the first one, for the German Reich, isn't really here, and you can argue this is because in 1933 a lot of the parts of the Treaty of Versailles were abandoned. The lack of an air force, the Luftwaffe, the reduced manpower, basically all the things that hurt the country were stopped. It was only the land things that came in later, so the Treaty of Versailles less important with Germany. However, we can implement treaties with Austria and Turkey. We can begin looking at the treaties with Austria, seen here with the Treaty of Saint-Germain. There are 3 key points we can take away from the Treaty of Saint-Germain that could be implemented into the game. The first one being limiting their manpower to only a volunteer army of 30,000 people. In the game they literally start with 30,000 manpower, so if you added in the ability to stop them from changing their conscription law, you've immediately ticked that off the list. The second thing was the dismantling of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This really isn't represented here at all, considering that it was a major part of the Habsburg dynasty of the Austrian identity. All they kind of left at this point was the Germanic resemblance, so it is slightly represented in the giving away of South Tyrol to Italy, but I think there's more you could do to implement how they want to reclaim certain territories, get back Hungary. I can understand this of course could come in the form of a focus tree, but we'll get to that in a second. The last bit was that they were banned from ever being able to connect with Germany, despite the fact of the massive German population within their country. This again could simply be a rule that's given by the idea that says cannot join a faction with Germany, cannot negotiate with them or anything. Very simple. So why am I suggesting these things? Well, why would we add treaties to limit gameplay? Quite simply, because we want to break the rules. Using the example of Italy, we can see the naval treaty. The treaty makes them, of course, limit the size of their navy, but there's different ways they can get around it. One of them is abandoning the treaty, which of course gives an escalator clause and can have countries declare war on you, so probably not the best course of action. You can also cheat on the treaties and kind of sneak your way into removing their validity. This is the slow case for adding appeasement to the game. So, let's say you're playing as Austria and you've turned fascist and have high stability. Maybe then you could use your political power to remove the clause that says you can't join with Germany, and basically due to the France and Britain stopping their claims against you, you can push through with appeasement and just join German Reich anyway, in the same way that the Allies didn't really do anything about the Anschluss. You could make the same argument with the manpower as well. Let's say you have high war support, you can spend some political power, remove the clause of the treaty that says you can't change your conscription law, and then there we go. You can now go from volunteer only to limited conscription. Of course, not all the treaties have to be sort of limiting and debuffs and struggling down on you. You could also allow them to open up to ahistorical options. So here we can see the Treaty of Lausanne, or the Treaty of Severus. The key point we'll take away from this treaty is that the Ottomans had to give away their colonies in the Middle East that they gained from the Mandate. This can really help to show my case for the term appeasement. Let's say you're playing as Turkey and you want to regain the colonies. There could be, as seen through here, a decision, or in its own menu, the ability for you to request for Syria, Lebanon, Israel/Palestine, or Jordan, even Kuwait. But in exchange, there must be an agreement. It's an exchange. These can come in many ways. So if you're trading with the Allies, they may offer things like you may never join the German Reich in a faction. You may have to give them your resources, essentially for free. You may have to give them a large sum of equipment. In effect, you could create a system of interwar period appeasement, which is good because it stops Turkey from ever having to get into a war with the Allies early on, if they, for example, wanted to form the Ottoman Empire. There is some historical backing behind this as well, because during this time period the Turkish did get control of the Hatay state, which will be this little bit here around Aleppo. In effect, I feel like treaties could cover so much more of the game. The concept of having to exchange land in turn for non-aggression pacts, guarantees of independence, resources, equipment, it goes on, and there are so many different treaties in the game that could be expanded. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it was half of Poland and non-aggression, but maybe you could be aggressive and ask for more. There's also the very, very late game of Youre, where you split Germany. Perhaps you think you want all of Germany. Perhaps the Soviets think they deserve more of Italy. Some sort of ability to bargain who gets what so that the peace deal simulator isn't so toxic and overbearing could be interesting. Okay, so onto the League of Nations. So you may be thinking you're looking at HOI4.
No, much more better.
You're looking at a picture of HOI4. That is because I'm using this to illustrate what could be an interesting feature with the League of Nations, with a little button up here. So once we click that, we could get a screen looking like this. Now, to some of you, this may look like a similar mechanic to the Holy Roman Empire from EU4, and I think it does fall into that same vein. The League of Nations, for those who don't know, was a massive intergovernmental body used to dictate peace in the post-Great War period. It famously didn't go very well, didn't really achieve much, and completely collapsed after World War II. That is to say, it doesn't necessarily not deserve a place in the game. I think the best way I could explain one way to implement the League of Nations is by going through the drop-down menu I've created here. So you could have major members. These are the members that can propose things that the League of Nations can do. You could do it just by basic majors in the game, so Britain, France, hypothetically America if they joined, Japan, standardised majors. You could do it by whoever has the highest industry inside the League of Nations, which could be Sweden, assuming they get lots of trade, build up their civs, and then they get a higher position in the council. Or you could do it by whoever is hosting the League of Nations, which in this case would be Switzerland, with the headquarters being in Genova. You can see I've illustrated it here with this little flag friend. That is to say that other members can join, as I've illustrated here. You could have Brazil or Iran or Canada, and you could expand the list for however historical members were a part of the League of Nations. People can leave, people can join. This empty square here is where I would stick in decisions and mandates that people could do. So, in my mind, the League of Nations would be a reactionary body, not one to take action for themselves. One such example of how you could implement the League of Nations is at the very start of the game, with the Italian War on Ethiopia. The League of Nations was considering dealing with this situation, but ultimately decided not to because they didn't think they had the strength to stop Italy. If you could add in some interesting alt history with the League of Nations, you could make it so, as some discussions were had, you could embargo Italy for as long as they are at war with Ethiopia, or the Britons had also considered closing the Suez Canal. This would block off the Italian supply and make it harder for them to have the actual war. Assuming the Italians fail, this could open up a League of Nations ability to white peace the Ethiopians and the Italians out. It's essentially adding into Haile Selassie's idea of appealing to the League of Nations to help and choosing whether or not they should. To give out some more examples of reactionaries, you could have the League of Nations stopping people sending volunteers to the Spanish Civil War, which they tried to do. You also had wars and conflicts around the world. You had the German request for Memel, you had the Peruvian war with Ecuador over the territories. It could be your responsibility, playing as a major, that you can choose your battles wisely and hopefully hinder the ability of other nations to cause problems. And that leads me to this bar here, which looks very similar to the autonomy bar. This is the success and failure of the League of Nations, because the League of Nations is only as strong as people want to believe it is strong. The more successes the League of Nations has, the higher this bar will go, until eventually it has succeeded in stopping major wars and maybe even winning World War II with the hand of its allies. You could transition this into the maybe a United Nations group, or the ability to invite tons of people to the United Nations, a victory. But basically, every time you succeed in doing something as the League of Nations, enforcing a peace, stopping a war, negotiating a trade, you've done well. Every time the League of Nations fails to deal with a problem, it goes down, until eventually, if they fail too much, the League of Nations is completely disbanded and has failed its goal. It failing its goal can come in many ways: the remilitarization of the Rhineland, the Anschluss, the death of Czechoslovakia, the war with Poland, World War II in general, the Sino-Soviet War, the Spanish Civil War. To put a long story short, the League of Nations is going to fail. So why add a mechanic that is essentially doomed to fail? I think players would like the opportunity to try and make the League of Nations work. If you come in playing a major and you're given the ability to make small changes to just hopefully push the League of Nations through to victory, or at least buff your ability for World War II, that could be interesting. It can also be used as a stabiliser in case anybody tries to go alt history and you want to stop them. That's not to say that you won't be able to screw people over. I don't want anybody games being ruined, but the ability for the League of Nations to hinder people in case they're doing something you don't want them to, blockading trade, embargoing, stopping equipment and then leasing equipment to people you like, could be interesting. I think the League of Nations has its ability, and judging by people's mods on the Steam Workshop, I'm not the only person to have thought this could be a good idea. Okay, and lastly we have peace conferences, and the very concept of peace in HOI4 in general. I think when the developers were making the game, they took Franklin D. Roosevelt's words, unconditional surrender, to heart. It seems in war, unless you completely dominate the country, annex all their cores, and completely destroy them, they won't capitulate, which I think was mostly true in World War II. However, I'm not sure if this necessarily has to apply to minor wars around the world. Let's say, for example, you're playing as Bolivia or Paraguay, and you're trying to war the other. If you come to a stalemate, it feels like there should be the ability to offer peace. It wasn't until 1943 that the concept of unconditional surrender for World War II was really formalised into its existence. So getting stalemated between two minor nations in a non-great war feels like there should be the ability to offer peace if both of them lack manpower or both of them lack equipment. Or, for example, maybe you can take the claim or core territory you want, so Bolivia takes its Chaco Boreal, but it doesn't necessarily have the ability to push all the way in. Well, maybe you could offer peace, request the core territory, but if you ask for more than that, Paraguay will say no. I'd also say that peace deals seem to focus heavily on either annexing territory or puppeting a country, when if you look at something again like EU4, there's the ability to ask for trade resources. So you could do what they do with Mexico and maybe gain control over the oil. And you'd be much more likely to have an AI agree to you just taking their resources instead of annexing their entire country. The other half of the peace conferences talk is peace conferences themselves. A rework to the way that appeasement works comes in saying that certain people should agree to have certain territory. So as we said earlier, having the ability to offer peace is a good way to form appeasement, but also agreeing that certain countries won't steal all your territory is important too. I can't tell you the amount of times I've played as France, gone to war with the United Kingdom with the Axis, and then Italy has taken northern England and robbed me of everything I hoped. Perhaps it should be more concrete that when you justify a war goal for territory, if you justified for that territory, you are guaranteed to get it. It just seems to make more sense in context. Or maybe a distance from territory modifier. I'm really not sure. There's many ways you could approach it. But I think in its current format, peace conferences could definitely use a rework, and I'd be interested to see if they do get one in the next update. Okay, so that's everything I had. Those are my 3 big ideas. And you know what? If none of these suggestions are added, I'm fine. I will be happy. But I hope the core concept at its heart, building upon appeasement, those early 3.5 years, 1936 to 1939, gets even more content. Because that seems to be the crux of where a lot of players enjoy the game. A lot of people like to play miners, a lot of people like to experiment with trading and interesting deals and altering history. So the ability and mechanics you can add in to allow that to happen could make the game 10 times better. I look forward to hearing people disagree with me in the comments section. If you liked the video, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.